We have one thing we have to do because this is Kenneth Grant after all. So I'm just going to do it and then we can do the show, okay?
Sure.
Oh, my boy going to school. Fuck it up, Kenneth. Kenneth, fuck it up. Fuck it up, Kenneth.
Fuck it up one more time, Kenneth.
Kenneth Grant is an American professional football defensive
No, fuck you.
tackle
I was
for
gonna
the
make
Miami
that,
Dolphins.
No, I was going to make that joke.
The son of Kenneth Grant Sr. Editing Wikipedia right now to link the character.
For us, who have the inner knowledge, inherited or won, it remains to restore the true rights of Attis, Adonis, Osiris, of Set, Serapis, Mithras, and Abel. These words of Aleister Crowley inspired me as a youth, and imagining myself as one of those whom they were addressed, I soon discovered that for some reason I have not been able to fathom it was the god Set that I was being called upon to honor. I accordingly took it upon myself to penetrate the mysteries of this, the most ancient of deities, and to trace the history of his rites from an indefinite antiquity to the present day.
Imagine that there is a brilliant white light just above.
Is commentary on the magic art.
In the years of the primal force, in the dawn of terrestrial birth.
Oh, that was very educational.
Now magic will take place. Don't be fooled by what I just said.
Welcome everyone. I am Stellar Mysteries Kennedy, and this is Chaos Magic News. We're not on Sirius XM, but we are a part of the Sirius Current.
Boo.
As always is my Typhonian co-host, the old Isis Lodge. How are you, old Isis?
Hey, Kennedy, let me tell you something. This whole podcast, metaphor for sex. That's actually what it is. Look, I'm just saying, the listener, being the receptive, the vibrations go in, they stimulate you. Like how simple can we make it?
Yes, this is all an operation to create a magical child, and that magical child is cold, hard cash in my pocket from the Patreon.
Oh, boy. Episode 60, and as you all know, as is our way, every 10 episodes, we have a little breakdown. And then we go,
we didn't think we'd make it another 10.
Yeah, we have a little breakdown.
And we scramble to come up with an idea for a special.
No. We have a breakdown of a notable occultist or a certain branch of occult ideas. We have other types of breakdowns between episodes. But for every 10 episodes, we have a special. And we've been tap dancing around it. We've mentioned him in a staggering amount throughout the show and in the other specials.
Yeah, I think he's come up in every single special except maybe one. I don't know if we brought him up in the Grant Morrison one.
Maybe not.
Maybe by accident, because we said Kenneth Grant instead of Grant Morrison, because there's too many Grants.
Yeah, but
and Ulysses S. Grant, forget about it.
And a government grant? Well, we're not getting any more of those.
Not after the last episode.
No, I meant after this current administration, but yeah, never mind. We are talking about the man, the myth, the legend, Kenneth Grant. More specifically, we are actually going to be going over his first 3 books in what are known as the Typhonian Trilogies. That's multiple trilogies, which is 9 books going, I believe, from the Magical Revival to the 9th arc.
Yes, that is the last one.
For this first trilogy, we are going to be covering the Magical Revival, Aleister Crowley and the Hidden God, and Cults of the Shadow.
Probably the most well-read of his books, I would say as well. Maybe Outside the Circles of Time gets a little more play as well, but I think the Magical Revival, Hidden God, and Cults of the Shadows are...
I think Night Side of Eden probably gets...
Night Side of Eden
because that's his...
well.
We'll get it, and trust me, this is... I don't know if it's going to be like, the next 3 specials are going to be, or the next 2 specials are going to be all of that, although that would put us right in time for episode 100.
Well, we would finish the 3 on 90 is what we would do.
That's what I'm saying. That would set us up in time for
something new for the 100 special.
Wait. No, it wouldn't, because this is 60.
Yeah,
So
that's
the
what I'm
next-
saying.
So the
We
trilogy
would finish
would be,
on... Oh, no, we would finish on 80.
So 70, yeah. Oh, so we'd still have 20 episodes. Oh, man. Okay, abort.
We can't do math. Abort.
First, we can't pronounce anything. Now we can't do math.
God. Pretty soon the podcast will degenerate into we can't talk, and it'll just be hours of us going, yeah. And I don't know what you're thinking, listener. Oh, you do that anyway.
God damn it. Either way, we're not sure at what rate we're going to get to the other books in the trilogy, but we are going to cover like 3 books, unless something dramatic happens where it's like, oh man, we really got to just spend a whole episode talking about Night Side of Eden. I honestly think if you wanted to, you could do a whole break, like it would be very easy to do a breakdown of several hours just for one of these books. But as we're going to point out that, there's actually quite a bit of crossover in these books. Grant is not someone who is afraid to repeat himself.
No, he's not. I mean, I would argue that parts of the last book probably touch on things that are laid out here, really. It is, in fact, a connected trilogy between the 9 books, I believe. But specifically in these first 3, you get a common thread that is only expanded upon in increments with each book, rather than, okay, here's the first one, and oh, here's Jedi.
I'm going to hold my thoughts about the progression of these 3 books. There is a notable progression through these 3, and then that continues on where it's, oh, the next 3, I understand where the foundation here is being laid. But before we get into that, maybe we should just give the briefest of background on who Kenneth Grant is for someone who might have missed it and cannot operate a search engine.
Yeah, that would be customary. Kenneth Grant, born October 27th, 2003, is an American professional football player, defensive tackle for the Miami National Football League.
It's the wrong Kenneth Grant.
God damn it. No, shit. Wikipedia, you've screwed me again.
Time for another rousing game of football or magic. This week, Kenneth Grant.
I should have prepared that for this. Maybe the end of this, I'll give you a quick round of which Kenneth Grant said this.
I hate to be like this, but with the Peter Carroll joke, there are some interesting quotes from Peter Carroll, the football coach, where you can be like, maybe there is. I just don't. I'm not going to take any jabs at Kenneth Grant, defensive tackle, about his intelligence or his verbosity, but I find it very hard to believe that I would mistake any quotes from him for the absolute madman that is Kenneth Grant, writer of the Typhonian Trilogies, ceremonial and sex magician.
You would be wrong, because tell me, is this quote, all I do is win, defense. Which Kenneth Grant was that?
Oh, man. This is a tough one.
Okay, so...
That's not a real quote from him, is it?
No.
Oh, well, you're an asshole. Okay, fine. This is the last joke, and then we'll go into it. What's funny is that if you search Kenneth Grant, if you search Peter Carroll quotes, the football guy pops up immediately. If you search Kenneth Grant quotes, it's immediately like, now more than ever is evident that man must find his center, his soul, or perish in self-conscious...
A defensive tackle said that? Wow. I'm just saying, if you went out onto the football field and, like, you know, you're trying to give the rousing speech to get your team amped up, and you said some shit like that, it might work.
I think I have a knack for the football. In my career at Boston College, I always took pride in the run game. That sounds like... I'm sorry. I think I have a knack for the football. That sounds like the author Kenneth Grant trying to trick you into thinking he's the football Kenneth Grant.
Oh my goodness. Holy crap. Okay. All right. Okay. We have to give the listeners something of substance now. Let's do that. Kenneth Grant was born in 1990. Kenneth Grant was born May 23rd, 1924 in Essex. He was the son of a Welsh clergyman. As a young man, he studied Western esotericism, Asian religions, the theosophy, the spooky stuff that we all got into. Served in World War II, but got discharged fairly quickly because of an unspecified medical condition. Funnily enough, I don't know how true this is, but he allegedly wanted to volunteer for the British Army, hoping that he'd get sent to India, which is like a goofy teenager plan if I've ever heard one. Like, if I join the army, they might put me in India. That way I can go study with the guru.
During World War II, though. God damn, buddy.
Could you imagine? I want to see the alternate universe where Kenneth Grant got sent over there, and then it's just he comes back with some name like Maha Maratha, fucking like starts some fake ass Indian religion.
He definitely got his time over there, you know?
Grant, as a young man, became fascinated by the work of Aleister Crowley. Didn't we all? He attempted to contact Crowley for a while by writing to his publisher, but his publisher wasn't there anymore. He tried to get someone to introduce him, the famous Michael Hutton from Atlantis Bookshop, which is a big bookshop for occult people over in London. He wouldn't do it. Eventually, he got in contact with him, and they started up a correspondence, became friends, and eventually Crowley convinced him to be his secretary. At this point in Crowley's life, this is 1940s, and if you know anything about your timeline here, Crowley dies in 47. So it's a very short period where Kenneth Grant is actually working and being taught by Crowley, but like they are intimately related. He was living on the same property as him. He was being paid in magical teachings. He was initiated into the OTO. That's a known thing. Like he was an actual OTO member. He's not like many other people whose credits are kind of dubious at times. His dubious claims to the OTO come in later, but he was at one time the best hope for the OTO in England because he was being groomed by Crowley for that, essentially. They had a bit of a falling out, partially due to Grant's family being like, he's not paying you? And he's like, no, Ma, trust me, he made me a 9th degree. And she's like, what, you can't get a hamburger with the 9th degree. After that, they split. There was more contact with each other a bit, but they never again would meet. He was put in contact with other OTO members like David Kerwin. These sorts of things just happen, you know. He got set up as the OTO guy in England in the brief period that he knew Crowley. You know, we're talking a couple of years.
And notably that this, in a weird way, is Crowley's MO. It's like Crowley had a knack for finding folks that he was like, yeah, they're good, and I'll go with it, and just being like, yeah, you can have it, go for it. And usually it ended badly afterwards. It's probably notable that they didn't have like the huge falling out that others like Akkad. There's a lot of times where it's like it goes real bad and they end up disavowing each other and all this stuff. But no, what really happens with Grant is that he is someone who shows up very late to the party. He's kind of just like he was the new kid on the block, as it were, I suppose, in a lot of ways, that he shows up well after Crowley's prime, is still enamored with the guy. Crowley gives him, because he's got no one else to turn to. There's almost like this vibe of, I'm trying to think of what kind of...
He's trying to wrangle the California OTO. He's like, Jack's losing his fucking mind. Smith has been a disappointment forever.
Yeah, it's like I need somebody at least on my home turf who's like, hey, this guy's willing to listen to me. Clearly, Grant had to have some kind of know-how and a certain level of ability for Crowley to be like, all right, you're worth my time in the first place. But at the same time, there's also some very notable quotes that Crowley says. That, you know, there's one where he tells Grant something to the effect of like, you can't be satisfied with the simplicity of life, so you have to go off into a pipe dream, which is a criticism that you can make of Grant throughout, like everything this man has ever written.
Very much so. To get a little less into biography and talk a little more about the substance of what the man writes, you know, it's a fanciful picture of reality. We'll just say it like that.
Imagine you're Aleister Crowley. The writing of the Book of the Law happened
4 decades ago.
40 something years ago. Your occult order, you have been there at the helm to watch multiple occult orders fall into disarray and spread into different areas.
You've had several people that you thought were the golden boy betray you. or disappoint you.
You've pissed away all of your money. And pissed away makes it sound like he just squandered it
No,
all.
he
Now,
did.
Don't
He
get me wrong.
squandered every bit of his fucking money.
Well, he did. He fucked around, but a lot of it was like, I want to get this published, you know? You can at least say he was putting his money where his mouth was on that. It wasn't all oysters and champagne, but there was a lot of oysters and champagne. But imagine this kid comes up to you, like after writing some letters, and he's like, all right, I'm going to teach you some magic. And as you're trying to explain stuff to him, he's like, so have you read H.P. Lovecraft? I mean, I think that this guy is like, what I think is that this man was channeling actual entities. I mean, like Cthulhu in the bottom of the ocean. I mean, there's sort of like this Atlantean.
Shut up, Kenneth.
Are you fucking kidding me, kid?
He's trying to talk to you about Dion Fortune, and you're like, I fucking hate this.
So yes, you need to do this ritual to achieve your holy guardian angel. He's like, well, yeah, this was about Bess, right? This was originally an invocation with Bess, and he's like, yeah, it was. Well, you notice that Bess is like the first humanoid depiction of an Egyptian god. I think before that, I think it has something to do with this atavistic.
I swear to God, Kenneth, if you don't stop talking,
just bring me my opium. And please
mail this letter out. It's going to Gerald York. I'm going to apologize for everything I said to this man. Please, I need someone that can just deal with my fucking papers.
And we make it like, you know, we're poking fun, but like,
well, I mean, hey, there's a famous clip from our Lovecraft special that I'll put right here.
Should we give a brief on who Kenneth Grant is for anyone who doesn't know? Because I can do it in like 3 lines.
Go for it.
He was a student of Crowley who Crowley couldn't stand.
But I will say that Kenneth Grant specifically holds a unique place in the history of the magical tradition, in that in a lot of ways he is the butt of a joke. Oh yeah, everything is sex magic, and there's ETs and aliens
and draconian currents,
and there's Lovecraft entities and all sorts of creepy, spooky stuff going on. But without the dedication of Kenneth Grant, there is no chaos magic.
Yes, and there's 2 very important reasons for that, because after this, Kenneth Grant becomes acquainted through his wife Steffi with Austin Osman Spare, the great artist, the grandfather of chaos magic,
who we just did a special about 10 episodes ago.
Yep, they became incredibly close. Spare was living in poverty at the time, and he didn't have a whole lot of friends.
Here.
Yeah, it's a theme, right? Kenneth Grant just like, oh, this dude has nothing. He must be a fucking wizard.
Kenneth Grant just finding beggars on the street, and he's like, you know anything about magic?
Yes, but Kenneth Grant essentially became the executor of Austin Osman Spare's life's work. And without him, basically none of it gets published. Of course, Spare published many of these things in his own lifetime, but they're all very small things. They've survived into the contemporary age because of the stewardship of the Grants.
Yeah, and not only that, but Grant's own work explicitly props up and explains in Grant's own interpretations, to be fair, in his own interpretations of what the work means. But you can't from the magical the magical revival name drops 3 people specifically: Aleister Crowley, Dion Fortune, and Austin Osman Spare as the revitalizers of the magical current.
Yes, these are his big 3. Ironically, as we've called Kenneth Grant part of the big 3 of post-Crowley Thelema.
Oh, yeah.
The other 2 being, of course, Michael Bertio and Ananda. Hey, Editing Bay Kennedy here. I was today years old when I realized it was Nima Andahadna. My bad. I don't know what my brain was thinking there. Just... you read enough like misspelled Sanskrit, you just kind of assume everything's like a misspelling.
What?
No, Nima Ananda. Andahadna.
You're giving, I'm sure that's Grant's opinion of it. Is that a joke? Or
the fact that I think the 3 of them are the big ones?
Yeah.
No, I think they are. I hands down think that those are the 3 most influential post-Crowley Thelemic figures. It's certainly not Daniel Gunther or Lon Milo Duquette. Like, these are important, but these are the people that I feel like are creating the orthodoxy of Thelema. They were not innovators. They were the people coming up trying to explain to you that, no, this is what Crowley...
But now we're talking about like people that we think are and not necessarily people we agree with, because we had a lot of good and a lot of negative to say about Bertio. We haven't talked about Ananda at all.
Andahadna.
We have a lot of good to say about Kenneth Grant. I think we have less bad to say about Grant than we do Bertio. But these are people that we like because we're coyotes and we're weird people.
Well, I mean, yeah, so my biases are on display, but, I'm putting my balls on the table. I think these are the three important ones.
I'll stand by you.
At any rate, getting back to the Thelema side of things, as a senior, he totaled 38 tackles. Oh, shit, I'm on the wrong Wikipedia page again.
God damn it.
No.
I have a knack for the football.
After Crowley's death, Carl Germer, who succeeded Crowley as the outer head of the order of the OTO. If you don't know who Carl Germer is, he's someone that we could talk about for quite a long time. He's a weird guy in his own right.
Well, we do touch on him with Crybaby Thelema Hour.
We do. So go back and listen to that if you don't know who Carl Germer is. But Carl Germer was the person that succeeded Crowley as the head of the order, and he got to basically preside over it breaking down entirely. It's pretty bad. At any rate, this is part of that. He recognizes Kenneth Grant as a 9th degree, which is the highest degree you can get without getting into weird technical leadership degrees, but that's the highest level of initiation you can get in the OTO. Grant applies for a charter. He wants to operate the first 3 degrees and run his own lodge, and he's given that. He gets put into contact with Wilford Talbot Smith, who we mentioned earlier, who is the redheaded stepchild of Thelema, if there ever was one. After a fairly quick falling out between them, Grant starts being Grant. He starts trying to basically restructure the OTO. He creates the new Isis Lodge and gives a very interesting manifesto talking about the extraterrestrial Sirius set current. And he discusses the energies of another planet coming down onto Earth, which he identifies with Nuit. This pisses off Carl Germer unbelievably. He calls it blasphemous and then expels Kenneth Grant from the OTO. Kenneth Grant, of course, as you do when you are like, I am the new guy, I'm doing the thing, I've reestablished the connection with the secret chiefs or whatever kind of a thing you want to do. Kenneth Grant very much is the successor of Aleister Crowley in certain ways, because he too was like, you know what?
I'm going to change the locks.
I'm going to change the locks. I'm going to make my own order with blackjack and hookers.
And I think this takes us to the second big point of Kenneth Grant's influence on chaos magic, right? Another current running through chaos magic, right, is very much in that Discordian, and we say Discordian, but very specifically Robert Anton Wilson. Robert Anton Wilson's notions about reality tunnels, the 8-circuit model, the way in which he approached Crowley, describing Crowley's magic as the idea of willed brain change and things like that. Christopher Hyatt does a little bit of it too. Robert Anton Wilson specifically has a profound influence on chaos magic, even the notions of like belief as a tool, as people describe it. And we just did an episode talking about why we think that's wrong. But the influence of Wilson is undeniable. And as far as I can tell, granted, he rubbed elbows with the California Caliphate. The man who initiated Wilson was a Typhonian.
Very much so. And you could tell from Wilson's own writings on Thelema, they tend to carry a very Typhonian OTO bend. The Typhonian OTO, if we haven't said the name yet, is sort of the title of what Grant's split of the OTO is. It is the Typhonian Ordo Templi Orientis.
It is of note in Cosmic Trigger when Robert Anton Wilson describes his experiences where on July 23rd, he became convinced that he was in contact with alien intelligences from in or around the Dog Star Sirius. He makes note of some reading that he did talking about the particular constellation that Sirius is involved with and the associations with the Phoenix, and he mentions Phoenix as being Crowley's secret name within the order that he did not actually explicitly tell people about. And he mentions reading this, and he doesn't name drop what the actual book is, but there's only one book that really brings this up, and it's Kenneth Grant's The Magical Revival. So there you go. Cosmic Trigger and this whole serious mystery thing, a lot of that is wrapped up because Wilson was influenced by Kenneth Grant. It's kind of it's a weird thing to think about. Robert Anton Wilson probably considered himself very much influenced by the writings of Aleister Crowley, but in a weird way, a lot of the really out there bits of it come from Aleister Crowley by way of Kenneth Grant, which is weird because it's like, man, I don't think Wilson mentioned jerking off to a sigil once.
Well, it was you got to think about the time because when was Wilson writing? 70s and 80s, right?
Well, 60s into the 80s, and then he wrote quite frequently into his death. 77 is when Cosmic Trigger comes out.
Right, and The Magical Revival had only come out in 72.
Yeah.
This is all very, very close together.
Yeah.
Grant's work on Spare had come out in like the 60s, and Spare himself had seen a bit of a resurgence in that period, but a lot of these things were still forming and coming together. Everyone's kind of swimming in the same sea, you know what I mean?
And then even like as we were joking about it, but Grant's sort of insistence on Lovecraft as, I think he used the quote when we were doing the Lovecraft special, but the idea of fiction as planting the seeds in the mind that is not ready to accept something as fact, right? Of Lovecraft's fiction being admittedly fictional, but as sort of seeding and carrying these ideas of a magical current that exists, and then ultimately of Lovecraft simply failing to rise to the occasion. That is something that in a lesser way permeates chaos magic as well, and this notion of like the admittedly manufactured, the artificial, but somehow still garnering and having that magical application to it. God, I can't remember the guy's name. It was one of the Blazing Star OTO guys discussing with Kenneth Grant because they were talking about the Simon Necronomicon. And he's like, this is all made up. This is nonsense. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, there's all, the entire magical tradition is full of fiction, of made up stuff that is serving the purpose of elevating human consciousness for magical purposes.
His name was Ozzy Raza. Well, that was his magical name. I don't know if that was his real name or not. It's a shame that the video he did was taken down, but he gave a lecture on the relation of Thelema to the Yazidi,
what Grant has a lot to say about,
right, because of various connections of Aiwass and a certain person named Samuel Aiwass Jacobs to the Yazidi, and their oddly in this day enigmatic religion. We still don't know nearly as much about it as we would like to. It's a very confusing historical sort of thing for it. But at any rate, he says something to the effect of, this is all just made up. And then Kenneth Grant proceeded to give him a big list of all of these books, saying like the Bible, the Mahabharata, the Sefer Zohar. Like, all of these books were made up by people.
Yeah.
At any rate, that's sort of the idea that underlines much of Kenneth Grant's work. After Crowley's death, he does some editing with John Simons, who is probably like the foremost Crowley biographer of his era. At least well into, the contemporary era where people like Richard Kaczynski and Martin P. Starr, who are Thelemites and connected to all of this, were writing stuff. But in 72, he starts his Typhonian Trilogy. That keeps going until 2002.
And Grant died in 2011.
It's a crazy thing to really see just how close to all of these old figures we really are. Because Kenneth Grant knew Aleister Crowley, and he only died 14 years ago.
Yeah, and his last book was 2006. This man, granted, his heyday came and went, but this is a man that was consistently doing the work well up until his death, pretty much. There are jokes to be made. There's ha-has to be had. But if you look at this man's work and you're able to stomach it, I guess. Much like Bertio, this is a man who was very much seeking to develop a system in which we could all create a greater understanding of the magical processes. And his big claim to fame, his key to all of this was, in a sense, where they go like, oh, well, it hit him, everything was just sex magic. Everything was just fucking. But I think a better way to say it, a better way to approach it, is understanding that Grant fully believed that magic was a process that existed within the embodiment of the human being, if that makes sense. The sexual current, the use of sexual energies for magic was something that happened as a bodily experience. It wasn't about convincing yourself of things. It wasn't about tricking your psychology. It wasn't about messing with your head till you were convinced something happened. It was very much the idea of, by following certain processes and certain methods, the human body could be made to have responses that allowed energies to move in certain ways. And those energies were not only the thing that pumped your blood and lets you have that in out of your breath, but they were the things that created your thoughts. They were the things that allowed you to experience the universe as it were, or experience the universe as it is. And by augmenting them, you could find higher attainments. Because ultimately, he believed that the universe that we occupied was illusory in a way. But the Buddhists have, like Robert Thurman, right?
Mm-hmm.
He talks about the illusory body in Tibetan Buddhism, and he has a quote where he's like, I don't like illusory. I like when I translate that word, I translate it as the magic body, the illusory body. No, it's the magic body. And I think maybe in a way Grant would agree with that. It's like there is a certain amorphousness, a certain wobbliness to how we experience reality, because it is an inherently magical way of being. And that behind the veil is, the ineffable. As long as we are within this shadow play, you can see the ways in which the energies of the human body, of the apparatus that experiences, if you can utilize them properly, you can mold the illusion. You can see past the illusion. And I think there's something exceptionally thought-provoking about that. So jerking off, right?
I think to roll right into it then, right? Let's talk about the magical revival, because what you just touched on, I think Grant is willing to say right here in the introduction for us. I when I was rereading these for the episode, this was the quote that stuck out with me, partly because of my own biases. If you listen to the last episode where we give our big talk about, oh, no, this is where everyone's getting it wrong, you'll see that on full display. But I think what you just said is attested to right here. The question of discretion in occult matters is one that should be raised and settled at the outset of a work of this kind. The most ancient mysteries were of a physical, not a metaphysical nature. There was an esoteric and an exoteric version of them, corresponding to the written and oral law of the Jews. But contrary to what is usually supposed, the metaphysical was the exoteric version, not vice versa. This is proved conclusively by the 7th chapter of the Book of the Dead, which is certainly the oldest body of written teachings known to man. Here, side by side with the text which is intended for general use, appears the interpolated gloss of the initiated priest, explaining the text after the manner of the gnosis or magical tradition. The secret, oral, or hidden wisdom embodied in the gloss refers to the physical origins of the abstract concepts which appear in the text. Spiritual matters are explained in terms of physical, more precisely of physiological phenomena. These explanations were usually reserved for initiates, and the reason for their concealment was due to the physical nature of the gnosis, which became, in truth, the forbidden wisdom of the later age. The ancients may not have been acquainted with psychology, sexology, and endocrinology as known today, but they most certainly were acquainted with the occult uses of the sexual current, the improper handling of which leads to disaster, and they were infinitely more knowledgeable concerning the sexual science than are our Western psychologists today.
And this is kind of what we mean. The magical revival begins painting the picture for what Kenneth Grant is going to lay out through his entire career. Now, he starts in a strange place of sort of bringing about the history of how we got here, particularly in the West, and sort of the newer facets of it. He brings up Blavatsky. He brings up Crowley to a wild extent. He brings up Dion Fortune. He doesn't touch on Spare till a good bit later into the book, talking about the notions of the rites of sex magic and the rites of magic as a physiological happening in the human body. And what does he mean by that? He means that through things like the endocrine system, through things like the sexual process, the hormones, the act of sexual congress with and without partners, bringing up the chakra systems of the Eastern traditions, he paints a picture of an interrelated web of associations and meanings, bringing up the Tree of Life, the Western Kabbalah that we're all so very familiar with at this point.
I mean, there's probably not an aspect of Western occultism that he doesn't touch on to some extent in this sort of origin story. He basically does bring it up from as far back as possible, from Egypt to Tantra. He talks about, of course, the Golden Dawn and the Theosophical Society as being these things that were set up in a anti-Christian, in the sense of the version of Christianity that had come to dominate the planet at the time. And he relates that very specifically and obviously to Aleister Crowley. He speaks specifically of Thelema as a satanic tradition of Shaitan Aiwaz. His belief is that the super terrestrial intelligence of Aiwaz that conferred the Book of the Law to him is one that is associated with Shaitan or Satan. He brings up the Yazidis as an example of this. He brings up a few other ones. He equates Shaitan, Satan, Aiwaz with Set, and Set being the, spoiler for the hidden god. The hidden god is Set, Aiwaz, that sort of thing. He views this sort of cosmic force, and that seems to be, at least in my interpretation of Grant, or my interpretation of Grant's interpretation of, but the idea is that these are these cosmic forces, these extraterrestrial forces that we understand in the shape of gods, right? The notions of Nuit and Hadit as Nuit being the great expanse, the Our Lady of Space, the great nothingness, and Hadit as the singular focal point, that through their union they produce Ra Hor Kuit. The gods that we view are manifestations of these processes, of these two ontological forces coming together, and they culminate in the birth of the child, and the child is that manifestation of our universe. Yes. If you know anything about Hinduism, you might be thinking like Shiva and Shakti, as many people do,
which he equates to later. He has a whole thing about Kali as another facet of Nuit and Babylon and all of that. What it seems to me is that he is someone who's very, I won't say fast and loose, maybe just very expansive, in that he is showing you all of the, like, in the idea that like Hadit, Nuit, and then equating them with like Set as the dark twin of Horus that has to exist, that has to take form so that there can be anything. And it's like in this sort of dualistic notion of like, for something to manifest, there has to be these opposing forces, the twin concealed. And he can even equate that with Ra Hor Kuit and Hor Par Krat, which we see as in more traditional looks at Thelema, where it's like, well, that's Horus the elder and Horus the younger, but they're sort of the twin, Haru Raha. These are the composite manifestation of Horus. But he goes like, no, well, this is the equating with Set, and Set is not only a god of somewhat of chaos, of a misunderstood malefic entity, but it is also notable as Set is viewed as the child. Set gets equated with, and this is where like the Sirius stuff comes in, because he has a whole lot of different takes on the stellar cults of early man, which may or may not have existed.
Right, yeah. The infamous Draconian current, as he calls it in this work, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the most ancient form of these religions are these sort of stellar cults that relate ultimately to this worship of the Dark Mother and the child, and they're all essentially practicing these sorts of sex magic workings that relate to these deeper sort of notions of this physiological reality that relates to magic and how it works. His big idea, and of course the title of this work as The Magical Revival, is that these were all ancient ideas that were present and have been carried forth in things like Eastern philosophy, like in various tantras, as well as things like the older Western esoteric practices of sex magic with people like the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, and of course, in his mind, the OTO.
And what it comes down to is that Kenneth Grant shows the idea that there is like the Great White Brotherhood, right? The congregation of these magical adepts, that some exist on a physical plane with us, some exist in a astral or a slightly magical, like I'm trying to think of a good word for it, existing in a extra dimensional way. This is where he brings up like the secret chiefs and stuff like that. That this congregation of saints has always existed, and they direct the current of the universe. They exist as the mediators of mundane existence, right? To push man forward into a different way of being, an evolution. And he gets that from Blavatsky, and he takes from Crowley. And it's the idea that this group has existed from time immemorial, and it all goes back to these old stellar cults. He talks about throughout the years and throughout the millennium, much in the way like Manly P. Hall with the Initiates of the Flame, right? The idea that the actual mandate of these groups have moved from place to place over time. He describes the Golden Dawn, and he equates it with the AA, you know? Not the AA that you can go like bug somebody and have an email correspondence where they tell you to read some books, but like the real deal AA is that's what he's saying as the Great White Brotherhood. And he views the Golden Dawn as the outward circle of that group at one time, and then eventually it transfers to the OTO.
But Grant takes this seriously, not only in the sort of mystical way that people like Crowley understood it, but he takes it into the area that we would start to get to much later in the Typhonian Trilogy, but it's still present here. The idea that it's not as simple as there's an ancient brotherhood that's been going since time immemorial. It's that like the leaders of this group are these stellar alien consciousnesses.
Yeah, and it's not only that there are these extra planetary forces that are seeking to be made manifest, this is where he brings up Lovecraft, as Lovecraft saw this and he was horrified by it because he couldn't rise to it. He couldn't understand it. He equates that in Crowley's work, talking about the coming Aeon of Horus to be one of destruction, of tearing apart the world, of everything falling apart. And he even brings up that it's like every time that Crowley publishes the Book of the Law or republishes it, things go wrong. You know, there's this idea that when the Aeon of Horus is fully brought into fruition, and for those keeping track, it's been, you know, a little over 100 years now. Maybe that's why we're in such bad shape.
Can things stop getting bad?
When are they going to republish the Book of the Law next?
Maybe that's why they're not doing it.
Cowards. These stellar forces, these extraplanetary forces, are indeed seeking to find a way in, to lead man into the future. For him, the chief way that this is done is through magic. And for Kenneth Grant, all magic is ultimately the use of sex magic, the use of the augmentation of the reproductive force for another purpose. And he brings up Crowley's writings. There's commentary in The Vision of the Voice. There's one that I always hold on to because it's Minotaur shit, right? This is the 16th Aether, which is called Leia. There are faint and flickering images in a misty landscape, all very transient. but the general impression is of a moonrise at midnight and a crowned virgin riding upon a bull. And they come upon the surface of stone, and she is singing a chant of praise. Glory unto him who hath taken himself the image of toil, for by his labor is my labor accomplished. For I, being a woman, lust ever to mate myself with some beast, and this is the salvation of the world, that always I am deceived by some god, and that my child is the guardian of the labyrinth that hath 72 paths. And that's right at the beginning, but in the commentary he describes this because it's very obviously, it's Pasiphae and the bull, right? The labyrinth, it's the Minotaur, that sort of thing. So I remembered that very distinctly. But in the commentary, he describes the augmentation of the sexual processes and the recurring motif in mythology of woman mating with some beast, some animal, to produce a non-ordinary birth that would create some sort of supernatural or magical type of being. This is really what Kenneth Grant is about, not in a literal sense, but the notion of man through the use of the magical process and the augmentation of the natural reproductive process, producing the magical offspring. And by magical offspring, we really just mean the byproduct of sexual magic to bring things into manifestation. Sometimes it's very literal, where it's like moonchild shit. It is this idea that the godly, the divine, the extraplanetary forces are brought in through this augmented process, which just means sex magic. This is where he gets into the talk about like why there are these composite entities throughout our mythologies, why the Egyptians of note had these totemic animals that were always associated with each particular god. And he lays out the idea that, like, well, it's not so much that Horus is a hawk or a hawk-headed man, but this particular magical energy, this particular force that is brought about that we identify with Horus, or we identify with Set, or we identify with whatever. These were, in a microcosmic to macrocosmic way, that these were representative of this force, and that these were ciphers, these were all coded or symbolic representations of the ways in which that this force could be made manifest on the earth, right?
Yes. I don't have anything to add. You said that pretty summarily.
This is also where the notions of atavistic resurgence comes from, of understanding man as having all of these forces in some way or another dormant inside them, that they're able to be brought up through this process. And part of it delves into the notions of sort of the unconscious, or he uses the word racial memory, and I think in this case he just means racial as in like the human race, as in
yes,
like we're all
he definitely means racial in that sense.
Between all of this, what he lays out as he's going on about these sexual practices and this sort of history, and I will give the sidebar that Kenneth Grant's anthropological standing is very dubious.
That's being nice about it. You could just say he's wrong. Even by like 1960s and 70s standards, he's wrong on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that if you're going to approach his work, you do need to approach it just as it is, rather than trying to poke all of the holes in it, because it's like we can all acknowledge that he's wrong. The historical standing that he is bringing up, and it gets worse as it goes on. But if you can approach it just trying to understand the sort of system that he is laying out and the way in which he equates all of these symbols, because it's like right now we're already in very strange territory where it's like Set, Satan, Shaitan, Aiwaz. It's like these are all very radical different approaches.
And but here's the thing, like even Crowley equated like Aiwaz with the Yazidi, apparently. That's like a thing he did. He equated him with Satan. He equated the Holy Guardian Angel with Aiwaz and Satan and all of these sorts of things. But Kenneth takes it up to a whole new level.
This is why I brought up these are ways of describing forces, of energies, of currents that are able to come in from outside, quote unquote. If you want to wrap your head around it, you have to understand that the symbolic dressings that exist from culture to culture, and the way that these dressings mutate and change over time, are something that you just have to deal with. He even describes, if I remember, Sobek as like a prototype of the same sort of like animal-headed lord of bestial sexual prowess. That it's like these are not, these to Grant at least, these do not exist as independent entities or as beings of a very, very solid nature. These are things that exist as symbolic representations of much more subtle and sublime forces.
Right, exactly. He has a point in, I believe, the Magical Revival still. I think we're still sort of the Magical Revival. I will go ahead and say that the first 2 books of this series cover a lot of the same ground. So it's a bit back and forth as to which one we're talking about now. Co-host mentioned personally that they were, when rereading the Magical Revival, they're like, I thought so much of this was just Aleister Crowley and the Hidden God.
My memory of the Magical Revival was a lot more of like the history of magic and a little bit of like the serious stuff and talking about like animal heads. And then it's like, oh, no. He gets very hard into the sex magic very quick.
Right. Second chapter, I think, is the metaphysical nature of sex.
Yeah. It's notable that the first 2 books do cover a lot of the same ground. The only notable difference, I think, is that he starts getting a lot more heavy into the notions of Tantra and the left-hand path as being the widely misunderstood practice of using the female, that sounds so funny. But using of the notion of like the woman as, you know, the Scarlet Woman or the Tantri as it's like, no. What we equated as like this of the left-hand path, because especially in the West now, we view left-hand path as like this sort of antinomianism, like being a dick, kind of an edgelord, whatever. And he's like, no. What it meant was that you used the sexual currents, and particularly the use of a woman as the living embodiment of the goddess energy, rather than the right-hand path, which was a lot more of orthodoxy and metaphysical speculation and understanding, which in a way, I guess is kind of interesting, because we've just gone on a whole tirade in the previous episode talking about how chaos magic has run into a dead end because we've let ourselves get bogged down in metaphysical speculation. I'm not saying the answer is like, oh, we should just like, you should all just find like a lady who will let you have sex with them. I mean, maybe. You should, but maybe. But very much these 2 books cross over a lot of similar territory. The devil of Shaitan, Set, Iwa, Satan, as the one that is degraded and castigated to hide his holiness, is a recurrent theme. It is the notion that the sexual currents and the means by which they are augmented for magical purposes have always been kept secret and always viewed in a somewhat taboo sense for the purposes of hiding their utility, of hiding their sacredness. And there, like this book does cover a lot of that ground. It does talk about, like I said, the ancient stellar Draconian cults, and how that went from the stellar cults to the lunar cults. The lunar cults being highly associated with the processes of menstruation in the woman. And a lot of you are probably just looking at what we're saying and going, this isn't exceptionally heteronormative. It is exceptionally like cis-normative. And you're right, it is.
No
like,
two ways about it.
There's no way to talk about this that doesn't have that. And I think in large part, it is simply a byproduct of the time that it was written in.
Yes, and it's the byproduct of I don't want to say overly physiological and biological reality, because it's not, we can easily make the argument that it's like, oh no, penis and vagina biology is really stupid. Like, yeah, I understand that. But it's rooted in a very pragmatic, practical sort of understanding of sex and gender, as it were.
And not only that, but I think a lot of it comes down to Kenneth Grant was pulling from sources that didn't have the same conceptions that we do nowadays.
Right.
And he didn't have the same conceptions that we do nowadays. So even in the instances where he might maybe sort of come against cultures that had different views of gender and sexuality and all of that. He just didn't have the words for it.
Right, very much.
And I will, and this is where it's because I know in a couple episodes offhandedly we've said some comments about like Kenneth Grant having bigoty shit, and I'll say like going back through his work, I don't stand by that anymore. I don't think Kenneth Grant is a bigot. I don't think he was homophobic. I really don't. At least there's nothing in his writings that makes me say that. Even when we do talk about like the Crowley doing it in the butt for magic purposes stuff, he is not going on and being like, oh, this is an abomination and horrible and it's fucked up. He's mostly just sort of like, yeah, that's definitely like that works. It's still the augmentation of the sexual process for magic. It's just not it isn't what we're after. It seems to be what he's describing. He seems to be another, like Crowley, he was convinced that there was going to be a certain level of scientific validation of everything they were talking about. He talks about he's like, there are 14 excretions from the of the woman that exist that are known to science, and the 15th and 16th have yet to be, but the old magical traditions know of them already. And I don't think that's correct.
It's just pee. We've been over this.
Yeah, I was thinking in that joke, it's like, it's just piss, man. Squirting's just pee, man. I'm sorry. I don't think that this is an attempt of Grant to try to, and if somebody knows something that I don't, because when we did the Bertio special, when we did the Castaneda special, we were very much like, all right, let's put the weird sexual allegations and the shitty stuff in front of it and get out and acknowledge it, because if we don't, we're part of the problem. You can still get good things out of people who are bad people.
Yeah, like that Diddy song, bro. I'll be missing you.
But I haven't seen anything from Grant that makes me go, oh man, this was really fucked up. And rereading his stuff, I still don't see anything that's super fucked up or like makes me go, oh, we need to talk about this. I think in a weird way, Grant might have had some underlying thing of like, and maybe this is a very normal thing. I don't know.
He had a breeder fetish. That's what it was.
I don't know about that.
He was a breeder fetish.
I'm a weird guy, in and out of the bedroom. But Kenneth Grant strikes me as like he might have had some real, like, I don't want to say femdom, but like he had some real some real adulations of woman. And like,
I get it. I like women.
I like women too, It's like, the idea of like looking at a woman and being like, this is absolutely the goddess. What are you talking about? The love will make you think that like your partner is the most perfect person in the world. It's like, yeah, she can definitely bring about the magical current.
Let's give what we can of an overview of Grant's major contributions to the theory of sex magic. I think we can do that. I think that's the meat of both of these books, really.
Before that, I'll do let's do a little bit of because we've meandered quite a bit, and if you're listening still, God bless you. Grant seems to be of the opinion that there is a congregation of extraplanetary forces that are seeking to make their way known onto the Earth. They exist as these when I said these sort of subtle and sublime forces that make themselves known in God forms that are understood in the old cults of ancient civilization as stellar, as lunar, as solar, which is a big thing that comes up later, of the idea of the ushering of aeons, and how the current solar phallic cults have sought to suppress the goddess, to hide the ancient teachings, but also that there are these congregations of these magical adepts that are seeking to force human evolution in a magical and psychological sort of sense, in a spiritual sort of sense. He also equates them on a micro and macrocosmic level, where he brings up like the star Sirius as the sun behind the sun, as being a force of this magical current. He equates them all not only in the sense of these are planetary forces outside of the Earth trying to get to the Earth, but they're also recapitulated within the centers of the human body. And you can view centers as in like the chakra centers, the ins and outs of the subtle body.
And you can also view it as the physiological body.
Yeah, and that they have a correspondence with the physical body, of the endocrine system, of the various glands and of hormones and stuff like that.
And the reproductive organs themselves.
The reproductive organs themselves, exactly. Also, he goes into the idea that they are recapitulated in places of esoteric power upon the earth. He mentions Cairo. He mentions places over in the east. He mentions, I think he mentions like Essex or something like that.
Yes, definitely
Glastonbury.
Essex.
No, I think he says Glastonbury or something, but it's like somewhere over in, but yeah, so there's an interesting thought.
It's like checking out Cairo and the River Ganges and also Pittsburgh.
But no, there is something to be said about that. The idea of like, if this is a structure that exists in the most abstract, as in like from Kether to Malkuth, or from like the trans-Plutonian to the Earth, then they also exist upon the Earth in certain ways, and then they exist in the human body in certain ways, and they exist on the physical and then in the psychological makeup of man, all of those things. So there is an interesting, like, this notion of like, well, here's the structure, and it repeats ad infinitum to like throughout the universe in every shape and form. And then the basis of sex magic for Grant comes down to the direction of will to essentially hijack the energies of the sexual process as these as this endocrine system, as these subtle centers of power throughout the body are excited. Kundalini, or the fire snake, these subtle energies that are awakened and run through the body, that when they are tempered with the right process of will, with the self-discipline of a magical practice, with the self-discipline of one who truly knows his will, can be used to awaken consciousness from the illusion of the world, from this magically amorphous construct that we all experience. And there's a really good quote, if I can find it. Liber Agape, the Enchiridion of the sovereign sanctuary of the Gnosis of the OTO, shows how sexual magic is based on the assumption that no cause can be balked of an effect. If the natural effect is annulled, the discharge of energy is not lost. It forms a subtle or astral image of the idea dominant in the mind at the climax of coitus. Ordinarily, this idea is one of lust, and because of this, a tendency or habit is set upon the mind, which consequently becomes increasingly difficult to control. This tendency must therefore be destroyed. The mental exaltation generated by a magically controlled orgasm forms a lucent, lens-like window past which stream the vivid astral imagery of the subconscious mind. Specific images are evoked and fixed. They become instantly and vitally alive.
Can't say it better myself.
Well, yeah, it's the notion when we talk about the augmentation. What do we really mean? If you are using this sexual energy at the moment of orgasm, you are not focused on like, oh boy, I'm getting my rocks off, that sort of thing. It forces that energy into a different direction. The discharge, as it were, goes in the direction of where it is being focused. And for every fucking coyote that has ever jacked off to a squiggle, that is that is nothing. That is like, oh yeah, obviously, of course.
Well, somewhat, because I think what we tend to have is the idea, as far as sigils go, that it has to do with this like unconscious obfuscation and such, and that's why people are like, oh, well, you don't have to, jerking off's the lowest thing. You can do lots of things to charge sigil. But what Grant is saying is that it's entirely the sexual practice. That this is what the way this works is that the sexual energy itself is this sort of ultimate creative energy. It's this ultimate creative act. It's this thing that by doing it generates these sorts of effects in the world if done with the proper intention and control.
And what's interesting is that Grant goes into excessive detail of the ways in which this is done less effectively and more effectively over time. where he describes the like, this is why he mentions, like, well, there are some sexual practices that don't involve a woman partner at all. There are some cults of tantric tradition or of sexual magic tradition that do not care at all about the phallus because it simply exists as a stimulation of the goddess's energies. And there are some that are viewed in the sort of, and this is when we go into these breakdowns of like the stellar versus the lunar versus the solar, but they are all in more or less a different way of approaching the use of the sexual energy, where the solar phallic seems to be, in a way, more obsessed with the idea of like the phallus is the physical embodiment of the magician's will. The wand is a dick. There you go. I just saved you a couple of years in the OTO, I guess. But this is like the Shiva lingam, like, hey, you want to know the secret? It's a penis. But then the lunar cults that deal with the levels of ovulation and menstruation within the lunar cycle that is in a way correspondent with the menstrual cycles. It seems much more with there are certain energies that are conducive to different types of work based on where you are in that particular cycle. The stellar current is somewhat of the same, but that deals more with the mother that births the magical child, and he's describing these, again, micro and macrocosmic ways of looking at these energies that are existent within the human body. But it all comes down to this idea of the use of sexual energies within certain contexts, because he describes the goddess and particularly the tantric traditions, which again, he is probably grossly misunderstanding or at least radically reinterpreting of the ways in which the human body is able to cultivate subtle energies within certain centers of the body and directing them in certain directions in certain ways for the uses of magic. He goes into a whole tirade about varying tantric cults where it's like where all the energy stays within the Mahadura, or when they are directed out through there, where he describes like at the feet of the goddess. And so he's like, well, that's code for the Mahadura, the root. And then he describes where sometimes it's brought up along the channels for various different types of magical workings. So he even in his own books, he is presenting exceptionally different approaches, because there's the idea of like, well, you can use the sexual energies just like jerking off. And he doesn't say it like that, but that's what he means. And then he describes Crowley, like eating your cum. That's one of the it sounds very silly, but yeah, it's the idea of like, oh, well, it's like, well, in some practices, it's the idea of you don't orgasm, like you don't excrete at all. You need to maintain all of it's through the sexual process, but maintaining the ejaculate rather than letting it go out. And then he even describes the process of like, there are some traditions where they are able to suck the cum back into themselves after orgasm.
Well, yes, and you discuss various practices where and this is his words, not mine, where the female orgasm is sucked up through the phallus like a siphon.
Yeah.
Grant is very quick to tell you that this requires a lot of practice and a lot of work. So it's maybe not the best thing for you to try out, but it's a thing.
And he describes Crowley as using cunnilingus to take up the resultant excretions after the act as part of the imbibing of the alchemical process and that sort of thing. And then he describes,
I think that's in Emblems, actually, like, no bullshit. I think they describe a suction.
Oh, no, don't get me wrong. That's the thing. That's the thing about Grant, is that it's like he makes up a lot of stuff, but sometimes you'll think he made something up and then you'll look it up and it's like, oh, no, he was all but quoting. It does show that there is a radical plurality to the ways in which this is all employed, but he still holds strong to the idea that it largely comes from a particular tradition that dates back to antiquity, which it doesn't. But,
well, in Grant's world, at the very least, and this is a way that is shared with mine, so I will give him that. there is a certain primordial, perennial understanding of sexuality, right?
It's good that we gave the salient quote of it explaining it's like, well, if you balk the cause of its effect, it will be transferred somewhere else.
Right, exactly.
Because when you start searching through his work to find like a very concrete answer of what he means, it's not there. You know, that's the best you're going to get.
He gives it to you one time and then he's like, all right, now we're moving on.
Now we're moving on to the myriad of ways in which this cause may be balked, where he describes like a properly, I'm trying to remember what type of leaf it is. Whatever. It's like a banana leaf or something.
But like, yes, the banana leaf.
I don't think it's actually a banana leaf, but no, it's some type of leaf where it's like the excretions are gathered after the act. We'll do all kind of radical stimulation of this woman who is the embodiment of the goddess, and then we will take those excretions and use them for magical purposes. And there's tons of this stuff, and I think like I was saying earlier, that in the same way that Grant explains the menagerie of symbolic representations for what he's talking about, and sort of playing with them in a way of like, these are all exceptionally dense and involved ways of describing the same process. And we haven't even touched on the way like he starts talking about gematria and explaining how these group of letters have the same numerical value of this sort of letters, and this explains why this and this are connected.
Oh yeah,
a lot of. And there's a certain type of person that really gets down on that. I'm not one of them.
Right, yeah. It's the best version of things look like things.
Yeah.
It's better than saying that, you know, oh God, the Planck symbol is Saturn, but...
And I'll even say, because I had a tirade about this in the Discord when I was trying to wrap my head around what the hell Shugal was, but it's very useful when you're trying to figure out stuff in your own practice, because it can give you something to hang your hat on for a little bit while you figure things out. It doesn't speak to a grand empirical truth the way that Grant seems to think it does, or the way he presents it at least.
And maybe not to sound, this might be something to say for the end, but I'll say it here. It is weird to see someone that could have gotten so more grounded in the simple. I mean, not that he doesn't. He does get very grounded in the very basic reality of, like, penises and vaginas, right? Like, in that sense, he does very well. It's almost like Grant has to take all of the occult ideas he has and relate them back to this sort of theory that he has about sex magic and its ultimate import in the occult, right? It's like he has to make it so that all of these ideas really coalesce. It's like if he found an occult idea that he couldn't explain in these terms, it would ruin him.
Right. I think it does go to that Grant really does have a very simple idea about how magic works. And he's got, like, for someone who is so complex, and he's citing all these sources that are, some of them are better than others, and he's introducing gematria, and he's talking about, like, this ancient cult and this idea in Tantra and this sort of thing, is like, he is really coming down with a very simplistic idea of, like, yeah, the human body has these spaces in it that generate certain types of subtle energies that you can use for sexual magic. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple. But he is creating a worldview of the magical tradition that goes back to the very origins of man. And that's what he's doing. Like that, like he wants to create something that you can look at all of the magical traditions and say, okay, these all more or less fall in line with what I'm talking about.
Right. 100%. I think that might have to serve as our segue into the last book, because unlike the previous two, there's probably something to talk about here that's a little different, a little less fundamental, maybe.
Sure, yeah. Granted, for the record, we haven't touched on both of these books in depth. We've presented the broad strokes to the best of our ability. He does bring up Austin Osman Spare. This is probably one of the first times he does it, I think, of like talking about the death posture, which is notable because it gets brought up in Liber Null. Like, it's brought up in all of Spare's works and, things like that.
You're right. We should touch on Spare and Dion Fortune before we move on.
Dion Fortune is where he gets associating the chakras with the endocrine system. I can't say that came from Fortune herself, but she's definitely the one that gave it to Grant. I think she probably laid it out a lot better than if it wasn't. It's not. I don't think it was entirely her idea wholesale. I'm sure that notion was around a little bit earlier, but it was something that she laid out pretty well. Her ideas on dream control sort of come up, and then Spare's notions of the death posture, the new sexuality. These go into things we touched on in the previous special.
Right, very much. If you did listen to the Spare special, and if you didn't, stop this right now, go listen to it. This is a podcast, damn it. You listen in order. No, don't. For real, don't listen in order. Oh my God. You can see the sort of ideas we laid out for Spare there reinterpreted in this sort of Grantian, Typhonian lens, essentially. And as far as that influence of Grant, a lot of what Spare wrote was incredibly esoteric. It was very hard to understand. I mean, you can listen to us in that special discussing it and talking about how taking Spare on just his own words, you see a lot of differences as to what the popular conception of Spare is. And a lot of the popular conception of Spare is this sort of Typhonian, Grantian reinterpretation of his ideas. You think that's fair?
Yeah, I think so. I will note in the Magical Revival, he dedicates a whole chapter to Dion Fortune. I will say she doesn't get enough. Like, I know that she's one of the big ladies of occultism, and we're probably not doing her justice by not talking about her enough. But she's kind of like, she's a big fucking deal, isn't she?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. Funny enough, I just was discussing a book of hers that I haven't read that I wanted to read with someone. They're an incredibly important influence in the occult, and we don't talk about them enough because they're just not someone that influences us directly as much as well. I mean,
I'll do better.
Like this. We should do better. But there's a reason why Kenneth Grant is like, oh wow, we haven't done a special on them yet. There's someone that's an incredible influence on us, and Fortune's such an influence on them. We probably should put more of an effort into learning more about this figure.
It is worth noting that the Western tradition seemed to have a real faux pas about the idea of like women as initiators, and Dion kind of was like, nah, no, we need to get with that.
Right. I mean, it's if you think about like the Western occult tradition as it comes in the modern age, it's Blavatsky and Fortune and maybe Alice Bailey. But this is about Kenneth Grant, so we'll get back to Kenneth Grant. So a lot of this has been very conversational, and that's mostly because
you can't take this man's work and like talk about it from A to Z. You really can't. I mean, if you read these books, they're all over the place. I think they're great. I do. I really think you should read them. I think you should internalize them. I think you should really run with them. Like, it'll make you want to fuck. There's definitely something that can be said about like he mentions like Crowley was engaging in sexual intercourse during a lot of all of his works that like he wasn't thinking about sex as a magical application, but he was like doing the big sex, and that actually is what propelled him in such a meteoric fashion through his rise in the ranks. And I really love that idea that it was like, no, he was just fucking a lot.
He was just
and
being
it was
a
like,
Chad, bro. And
he was just being a fucking Chad. Well, and then it even goes like, he was like almost like, Crowley decided that all this magic shit wasn't really worth it. And he just got shacked up with this, with his wife. And then he got the Book of the Law. He thought he could get away, but he was such a Chad that he fucked his way into Revelation.
He was so Chad that he started the new Aeon, bro. You don't even understand. I wish I could fuck like that. But I think in these two books in particular, in a way, in the same way that we talked about Spare being like misunderstood because of the longevity of his work and the impenetrability of it, Kenneth Grant sort of has the opposite problem, where so many of the ideas that he laid out here that were really like very, very like, whoa, that's some wild shit, are sort of commonplace, which is why I think we've highlighted so much of like the big thing that we appreciate as the CMM boys with Kenneth Grant, which is the radical way in which Kenneth Grant's work is focused on the pragmatic realities of the human body and its functionality for magic.
And I hate to say it too, but Michael Bertio, right?
Of course.
Voodoo Gnostic Workbook, he describes like, you know what the greatest magical tool you have is the human body. You know, he describes the points cha, all these things where it's like it's you do not need these tools. You need to have a correspondence with your physical embodiment, because that is where all of the seats of power are. And in a way, it's somewhat roundabout, but it's this notion of like all of these magical forces, all of these things that can lead to revelation, that can lead to manifestation, that can lead to the magical experience. The use of all of these forces directed by the will exist in the human body. That the ceremonial trappings that we utilize are not because there is a set of magical words that are just going to open the gates for us or something like that. It's not that you need a specific skull harvested from a grave under the full moon or something like that. It is the idea that what you are actually utilizing are forces that are within you from birth. That's the crux of it. That is what Kenneth Grant is laying out. These are things that are hardwired into us, that humanity is hardwired to utilize these quote unquote energies, and which is just like a really shitty term. I understand everybody has those words that they latch onto, and it's like with stuff like this, I can't think of a better word for it. It's like these energies, these forces, these things that we can't point to directly and be like, all right, that's the thing. These subtle energies that are utilized by the psychosexual, by the emotional, by the mental to interact with this wobbly thing that we experience as reality. To use the CMN kind of pragmatist neo-chaote approach, that there are ways of dealing with the world that create a revealing, that create an understanding on which these things operate, and that chiefly among them are the uses of the sexual energy. That good enough? That makes sense?
Yeah, and I have another quote that I think means that Grant agrees with us. The working basis of communication with occult entities is as arbitrary as any system of algebra or geometry. As long as the system possesses an inherent harmony and internal coherence, it is valid within its sphere of function. Rainman, Lobachevsky, Poincaré, Einstein, Cantor all constructed mathematical systems which, although at variance with each other, are consistent within themselves. Even Grant at this point is willing to acknowledge the arbitrariness of certain systems, at least as far as their use, which is the bedrock of the sort of chaotic pragmatist bend that we have here,
I wonder how far we stray in modern occultism. Like, I really do. Because sometimes when we start talking Heidegger and like background understandings, and I feel like we're kind of really off the mark as far as what most people are into and what most people think about. Really, we are discussing the practical application. There was a book on Tantra that got recommended to me that described Tantra as looking at all of the available means for consciousness alteration and utilizing them. And I do think in a way that is kind of what we're about. I bristle at terms like consciousness and like the mind as this thing that exists outside and doesn't actually partake. It's the spoon that doesn't taste the soup. I think when it comes to things like Kenneth Grant, that in a way we're a lot closer than you would think at a glance. And it really does come down to that idea of the practical application.
It does. And Grant's really good for that too, because despite the heavy theoretical bend to Grant, which there are two types of magical writers, right? There are the theoretical ones and the instructive ones. I think overwhelmingly we have instructive writers on Magick these days.
I think he wants to be instructional, but he can't help but like cite sources and show you grammatria and go off on these large tirades. When you really cut away all of the, I don't want to say nonsense, because it's like, to him, I'm sure it was very important. It, like I said, it was this idea of presenting a worldview that really encapsulated the entirety of the magical tradition. I'm sure in Grant's mind, everything really fit. It all made sense. And like we'll see later in the Typhonian trilogies when we do the later specials, he really goes off the farm and starts like combining a lot of disparate ideas into a cohesive singular narrative of magic. But at its core, there is this logic, there is this pattern, there is this method that you can follow, and sometimes it does. I think an example I can use is like the Simon Necronomicon, where it describes these exceptionally intricate means of doing a ritual, and it's like, well, there's no way I'm gonna fucking do that. I can't get like a slab of gold and go off into the mountains somewhere. I'm probably not gonna be able to do that. You know, it's like I don't really want to. So, and sometimes he describes these things like, oh, well, this particular cult did like this really crazy fucking method. And it's like, well, I'm not going to be able to find this cult. You probably made it up, or you're cribbing it from some cited source from like 200 years ago that like they probably don't exist anymore. And
they probably made it up too.
Yeah.
You're both making this up.
Yeah. But at its core, there is an exceptionally simple yet powerful notion of the ways in which the human body, male and female, are used as the means of channeling extraterrestrial forces. That is exceptional. I love it. I really do. I love this man's work. I guess in a way like Bertio, where it's like I want to hate it, but I don't.
Okay, we're meandering a bit, but we'll touch on, I think, two concrete things before we move on to the last book, where I think we'll be able to have a little more structure to it. Like we said, these first two books are laying what has become a oddly common groundwork in occultism these days, but also one that trips over itself a lot between the two of them. I think the way we described it was Magical Revival has a bit more of a historical bend to it, whereas Aleister Crowley and the Hidden God relates a lot more to the more heavy theoretical ideas of it. But I think there's nothing that's not present in one that is present in the other, in a way. You know what I mean? Maybe they're
oh, definitely.
Yeah, they're a bit more worked out in certain aspects in either side of Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati come up in both of them. Dion Fortune, Aleister Crowley, Austin Osman Spare get talked about in whole sections in both of them. They're both pretty much covering very similar ground. But the two ideas from them that we're going to touch on real quick are Kundalini and Kalas. We'll talk more about Kundalini or specifically the fire snake in cults, but Kalas does come up in both of these works already, and it's something that will get continued in Kenneth Grant forever.
Yeah, so there's the notion of Kundalini, and Aleister Crowley himself is quoted as saying that all magical techniques are just the methods of rousing the Kundalini.
Yes, in a letter to Akkad, I believe.
Right before he said, fuck you, you stole my books. But yeah. It's the notion of this preternatural force that exists within the human body, right? That can be roused and awakened. The fire snake, which will climb the channels within the body and activate the subtle centers of occult power. It's described in certain sections of Grant's work as possessing of its own personality, as a transpersonal force, a transpersonal being, a transpersonal entity that actually that selects its own vessels, particularly with the notions of like the Scarlet Woman in Thelema, that it's like there are greater and lesser vessels, with ones that are more apt to carry that force up versus some that are not. It is something that is existent in all of us that can be activated through various rituals, through meditation, through specifically through the sexual congress in magical contexts, which I think is something that's repeated quite a bit through not just Kenneth Grant, but, pretty much everyone at this point. I don't even think it was a new idea with Kenneth Grant so much.
I mean, I think Kenneth Grant puts a higher emphasis on the prestige, the power, the importance of the feminine in occultism. I think that's sort of his little twist on it, because I mean, you hear Crowley writing about it. He doesn't say necessarily like bad things, but he's got kind of these weird sides of it where he's like, okay, well, you notice that every man and every woman is a star, but men are like outward stars and the women are like empty hollow stars. Like I think he also has a bit where he says that it's also not even important if the woman understands anything about what you're doing when you're doing sex magic, and that Theodore Royce had been like, oh yeah, there's tons of I had like a really good one that I employed. She had no clue what any of this shit was, which I think might be implying that he was hiring a sex worker, but I'm not sure. He's like, oh yeah, that's my magic sex worker.
I hate to be like this too, but you can totally do sex magic without somebody realizing.
Well, you can, but I think for Kenneth Grant, he's always.
I don't think he should. But
I think for Kenneth Grant, though, he's exhibiting the importance of they're always like embodiments of the goddess. They're always like, initiated powers, essentially. So I don't know. I feel like that's an important touch.
He does also acknowledge that sometimes, like particularly with Crowley, where it's like he utilized women that were, he uses the word unstable. And that might have been him quoting Crowley saying that they were unstable, but it's like, it's the notion that there is a physical reality to this, that it's like, it doesn't, sometimes somebody is just buzzing and they've got the energy about them and you can utilize that, and they don't necessarily need to know what the fuck you're talking about with Kabbalah.
Here, I'm going to read a quick quote just to add more quotes to this, right? The Scarlet Woman, a representative of Nuit, is the gateway to the void. She is the magical embodiment of the stellar goddess whose metaphysical symbol is infinite space, typified as the night sky sown with stars. She is the yoni strewn with flowers, imaged in the hymn to Kali. For the stars of Nuit and the flowers of the nubile virgin goddess are identical. Babylon, literally the gate of the sun or solar phallic energy, is therefore the terrestrial formula of Nuit, and her vulva is the pylon through which the cosmic forces sweep into manifestation when the magical seal, mudras, have been opened.
Yeah, and this is what we're talking about in terms of like the embodiment of the magical energies, right? It's like this, again, if you take nothing away from this long meandering talk, it is the idea that whatever magical practice you are engaging in, there is a embodiment to it. It is not a series of mental exercises. This is not something that you're thinking about. These are things that you are engaged with through your body. And what that means is that it is what you are engaged with through the world, the supposedly external, right? Like, and it's, believe me, it's not external. There's no internal, there's no external. It is just what you're experiencing as phenomena in this moment. And what that means is that, like, if sexual partner or whoever you're engaging in with these practices, is that there is a certain level of physicality that you are engaged in with it that is inescapable. And I do think that is something useful to hang your hat on. When people talk about like experience where they weren't actively trying to do magic and then magic stuff has happened. And I understand that like magic stuff happens without like you pulling your pud or whatever the hell, this isn't like, we don't agree with Grant in the idea that like sex is the end all be all of magical practices, but there is undoubtedly a way for magic to take hold and for those sort of energies or forces to be awakened and brought into the forefront that can happen unintentionally. And what that means is that they have to exist somewhere in this totality.
That's pretty good. So, call us.
Oh yeah. Call us. This is where Grant goes a little, I think maybe a little further with it than we do, but it is the notion that the kalas, right? There are these energies, vibrations, excretions that are known as the kalas, Kala, right? That these are the means by which magic is actuated. That's a great way to put it. So that's a 75-cent word for you, actuated. That's the way in which these things are actualized, is that certain types of energies through the various channels and centers of occult power, namely in the embodiment of the goddess, the woman, through the sexual congress and through various means, where it's like he equates the use of certain sounds and mantras as being ways of activating these powers, particularly as the kundalini or the fire snake is being brought up through the channels, right?
Right.
Grant is very specific with these, that each kala has a particular association, planetary, a certain association with various sort of god forms and ideals and notions, various correspondences, like, things that you can pull out 777 and look at your charts and be like, okay, this is where we're going with this. And it goes from the simplistic of, like, honestly, Peter Carroll's Colors of Magic, right? Where he ascribes like planetary and colors, and it's like it's associated with wealth or abundance, or this is associated with like malefic forces, or, this is Mars and this is Saturn. Those are actually laid out, not in this first trilogy, but later. But it's associated with particular paths on the Tree of Life, with particular spheres, with particular celestial powers. And it is the idea that through each act of sexual magic, you are cultivating and empowering certain centers to produce this kalas.
How do you test that?
That's a good fucking question.
In the way that we talk about both Crowley and Grant having the idea that like science will vindicate them, I'm just imagining like a horrifying future where Grant's ideas became the mainstream, and they're like, all right, we're taking I bring in the wife in so you can be like, all right, test her fluids to make sure I got the right kalas going.
And this is when we mentioned earlier, like the 14 excretions that are known to science. It's like, and this is where like I hate to say it, this is where he loses me a good bit, because it's like on a subtle magical idea of like, all right, we're going to do this particular type of working to bring forth this particular type of magical potency. But Grant is very much like, no. These are associated with, it's like there's a yantra that's associated with this, and there's glyphs at each point of this yantra that correspond to this, and they all correspond to like a certain phase of the moon, which means that it corresponds to a certain phase of the menstrual cycle. And I'm not saying it's wrong on its face. I'm just saying it's incredibly hard to test for.
I'm saying it's pee.
I'm sorry, Kenny. It's just all pee.
I just wanted to bring that up because I felt like that was an important thing to also lay, because we were very kind to Kenneth. We've said a lot of positive things about him. We had to point out that, like, oh yeah, also he does say stuff like the 16 vaginal secretions.
that you get on your banana leaf, and you use them to create the elixir of life. And because he really does goes off the deep end with some of these things, where he's like, if you get like the urine and the feces and you mess with them enough, and you use the proper alchemical read as sexual magic, because it's still all sex magic processes for it, you can get the elixir of life. And you can, like, I don't think it's in the Cult of Shadows. It might be in Night Side of Eden, so that might be something fun for the next special. But talks about the Bhairavas using the excretions as a means for immortality, and it's like I guess it's like HRT, because it's like it makes them bisexual. That's the word he uses, not me. But it's like it makes you like an androgyne, and also like you fear nothing anymore, and you're like semi-immortal, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
A
little much sometimes.
It's a little. Well, we'll get into it in the later specials.
In fact, honestly, cults of the shadow, we'll touch on that a bit here, because we're gonna get into the more problem areas of Grant's ideas, because we've talked about how Grant was building a world, right? Like he was creating this sort of view where you could explain all of these various magical traditions. And here's the thing, Kenneth Grant knew quite a bit about the Western esoteric tradition. He knew quite a bit about Eastern philosophy and Tantra and various things like that, right? What didn't he know about?
Arguably both of those things. But as we go in, like chapter 2 of the Cults of the Shadow is called The Afro-Tantric Tarot of the Kalas.
Love it.
Yeah, and this goes into where Kenneth Grant is attempting to take the whole of all of magical traditions and making them fit into one long lineage of essentially sexual magic. And I hate to say it, but it's like it like I said, these are good books. These are interesting things. You should really take the time to dig through them and read them. But you have to do it with the caveat that Grant really does start forcing things into a certain lens, a certain framework that just seems fucking gobbledygook at certain points.
Yeah, he attempts to explain various Africa diaspora religions in these terms, and it's not so good, friends. It's not so good.
He talks about the I think this actually comes up in The Hidden God, but it comes up in this more where he talks about like the snake cult, where they use like actual snakes as like means of like cultivating the oracular forces of certain women, where it's like, yeah, they probably like a snake that like, you know, licked her pussy or something. You know, it's like I don't know about that, Kenny. He brings up like Yoruba traditions and stuff like that. He starts equating them to Western Kabbalah sort of ideas of like this path corresponds with this. And it's, if you know anything about these traditions, it starts to turn into a bit of a slog. And I just ask you to shut off your part of the brain that wants to actually argue about historical accurate truth. And that's a hard thing to say, but it's kind of where we're at. He starts saying some shit that is just not like that ain't it, man.
Well, and part of it becomes obvious in another part of this book. The later chapters talk about the cult of the Black Snake, which you might remember as the LCN from the Michael Burdio special. Yeah, and he's informed by a lot of his ideas on these other cultures and such through Michael Burdio, for instance. That's part of, he's pulling on Michael while talking about a lot of these things.
And that's kind of where, I hate to say it, like that's where the first two books do a relatively good job, where it's like, okay, I understand where you're coming from, and the idea that the Aleister Crowley's Thelemic Tantra, in quotes, of the idea of like the sexual magics involving the Scarlet Woman and the Beast, and the ways in which that sexual potency can be used to produce magical results. It's like, those are all good. And then he starts propping up people like Michael Burdio. And like I said, Michael Burdio would not Michael Burdio would be an absolute nobody if it weren't for the fact that Kenneth Grant thought he was onto something. And we said a lot of good things about Kenneth Grant. If you look at that special, I mean, it's probably one of our more controversial uploads at this point. We got a lot of people that were really not happy with that one, and that's saying something considering the kind of response we normally get. But the fact is that these were honkies, these were Caucasians, these were people from the mountains of Caucasus. Taking the traditions of diaspora Africans and then like trying to mold them into their Western Thelemic backgrounds.
Right, yeah. And I mean, it's not all deplorable. You know, there are interesting ideas in the way that he tries to formulate this sort of narrative of sexual magic into these cultures.
As a coyote, I think that they're pretty interesting. They're fascinating. Because I am able to make that separation and understand that there is a difference between what this book is saying and what it is suggesting and how it is describing various practices. And I know that they're not what other people are doing.
Right.
These are not the historical, traditional understandings of these practices. These are things that are cobbled together to make sense of it in a certain framework.
Right.
But very much like the cult of the black snake that is described in the later chapters of this book. This is very much him like meeting Michael Burdio and understanding the occult group that Burdio has centered around himself and running with it and describing like, okay, these are people that are in a way keeping the long-standing tradition of sexual magic that existed from time immemorial and like working with it in a unique and novel way. And he is very much like, oh yeah, this is cool. This is great. This is what these guys are doing. And thankfully he doesn't go so far off the reservation that you just completely lose yourself. Or more accurately, if you've hung around this long, he doesn't completely lose you. But like the good way of saying it, like ontological graffiti, right? There's artwork that is in that book that was originally produced in Cult of the Shadow.
Right.
Like in black and white bullshit, you know? So it's like, this is very much, the latter half of this book is very much like a love letter to like, oh yeah, I met this Burdio guy and he seems really cool. So like, he just went with it, you know? I think maybe part of it is just like, it turns into this idea of Grant didn't have quite as much discernment as he should. Maybe he was taken in by Burdio. And maybe it goes to what we were saying where it's like Burdio was producing a rather interesting and ahistorical approach to a lot of these magical traditions, and you can get a lot of use out of that.
Yeah, Grant probably found that very appealing.
But we would be remiss if we did not establish that this is where Grant starts taking in parts and bits of his contemporaries that perhaps he shouldn't have, or perhaps maybe not he shouldn't have, but perhaps
his enthusiasm for is leads to a bit of a less than stellar sourcing, maybe put it like that.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. It's like he doesn't have the same critique that some of us would have of them. He doesn't quite dig into the ideas. Like he seems much more ready to just sort of throw these out in front of you and be like, hey, this cult of the shadow, and when he talks about cult of the shadow, he's actually referring to in the light of the rising of the fire snake, right? It is so blinding. It is so overwhelming that the reality that we have once occupied takes on the quality of shadow. That is the realization of the world that we exist in as this amorphous shadow play, because in the realization of that ineffable magical consciousness, everything else takes upon it the quality of shadow. And like I said, he goes pretty hard. Like there's a whole chapter where he's like laying out this framework of like Afro cults and how they equate to the Western tradition, and it's not great. And this is when he goes, like, he also starts talking about, originally he talks about Frater Akkad kind of flippantly, the way that like Crowley did, sort of like as somebody who kind of lost the plot. And then he starts getting into like, well, maybe Akkad was on to something with the notion of Akkad trying to establish the Aeon of Mott.
Right. For those who don't know, Charles Stanfield Jones, magical son of Aleister Crowley, they had an intense relationship. Akkad revealed some very important things that Crowley would carry with him through the rest of Thelema. You know, the revelation of like 31 being such an important number for Thelema, and then they had a big falling out, and Akkad at one point said, "Oh no, the new Aeon, the next Aeon is happening now." Like, and it was on his birthday. So yeah, it's
go Akkad, it's your birthday. New Aeon on your birthday. I hate to say it like this, but like I think Kenneth Grant starts off very earnestly with his notions of the secret tradition of sex magic running through, and like how it is being revitalized in the current uprising of occult practices during his particular time. And then as Cults of the Shadow comes out, and as he goes further with this work, he starts grabbing onto a lot of his contemporaries. And, you know, I guess I'd call Akkad a contemporary, but, you know, either way, this idea, if he starts latching onto far more recent workings and trying to incorporate them into what is going on. And this is where a lot of Kenneth Grant's fanciful and off the reservation sort of talk starts happening. And I think maybe it comes from an unwillingness to just go, this person's full of shit. You know, like if somebody came up to us and said like, oh, hey man, I established the new Aeon and here's my book, we're gonna look at this and be like, you're a fucking stooge, you know?
Yeah, unless, I guess if it was really good.
Yeah. I think a lot of it really does come down to this idea that there is a continuous revelation in occult practices, and he found people that resonated with him because in one way or another, he felt that they fell in line with how he viewed magic.
Yeah, and at least in what he was doing. In a certain way, it's like he's reporting from the ground, because he's like, after giving you the big historical work and then giving you the slightly more dense theory work, he gives you the hey, check out what's happening in the world today kind of bit. Because in a certain sense, like his interpretation of the, you know, Afrocentric practices and how they relate to all this is sort of an update, because it's not something that is well established in Western esotericism. You know, what's the word? Eastern traditions had long since been incorporated. You know, as far back as the Golden Dawn, they're incorporating ideas from the East. But that's an area that hadn't been touched nearly as much. So maybe it's, in his mind, it's sort of a bringing these things into the fold along with, you know, the more contemporary things.
And meanwhile, he gets someone like Bertio, who is claiming to have voodoo initiations, and he said, oh, I spent all this time over in Haiti and I did this. And then also Bertio like talks about Lovecraft. You know, he talks about the trans-Yugothian transmissions and things like that, where he might have just met a kindred spirit, where he was like, oh, okay, yeah, you're about the same crazy stuff that I'm about.
Oh yeah. And I mean, in a certain way, they're informed by their historical place, and they're informed by the practices they were engaging with. It makes sense that they would come to similar sounding conclusions.
Yeah, but it does ultimately create a very niche sort of approach and a sort of understanding, where it's like, if you read the Magical Revival or you read Crowley and the Hidden God, yeah, it's like, okay, I understand where you're coming from with this. I get the equations with certain Eastern traditions and things like that. And then Cults of the Shadow happens, and it's very hard to hold on to that same level of credibility, I suppose, as he is now stepping away from things that he can cite more firsthand sources for, and is now going off of certain rather notable personalities, I guess.
I mean, in many ways, we could just as well be talking about Crowley, because he was a contemporary of Crowley. You know, granted, Crowley was an old-ass man, and he got the benefit of his mature, magical, philosophical outlook, I suppose. But, you know, he was alive when Crowley was alive. He dealt with Carl Germer, you know, and he knew Spare. The things he was writing on were contemporary to him at the time when he was writing on them, even if they were older parts of the tradition for us. So, you know, it's not unheard of that he would want to incorporate that sort of thing. And it at least from a stance of like talking about what's going on, especially if he can worm them into his own larger theory, you know? Like, oh yeah, it's all going according to plan.
And like I said, I still think, like, because this is only like the third book in a series. I don't think he set out from the beginning thinking, I'm going to write 9 books and they're all going to coalesce around these certain ideas. And you will see from the progression that they don't ultimately all fall in line. But I think Cult of the Shadows, as the third book capping off this first trilogy, is in a weird way like it's the outlier. Like Magical Revival and The Hidden God, both, they repeat each other a good bit, and they make sense in what they are. And then it's Cult of the Shadows starts getting pretty dicey. I think this is where it turns into the sort of the joke of Kenneth Grant.
Yeah, that's a good way of
what
putting it.
he represents.
I mean, of course, Hidden God and Magical Revival both mention Lovecraft and various other things that you could laugh at him over, I suppose. But he really gets into the sort of wonkery that we associate with Kenneth Grant when we're being lighthearted about him.
And I hate to say it like this, but I do think a lot of it is he met Bertio, or he started corresponding with Bertio. And it's like he didn't need the help, I guess, but having somebody else to point to of like, this is the oddball occult guy that I can get around with is kind of interesting. And he brings up Spare again right at the end. It's like, you'll notice it's a couple examples of like, he ends things mostly with Spare. And I guess part of that goes to the idea that like Spare was Crowley left, you know, he lost, Crowley fired him and whatever. And Spare just let him hang around forever to help him get beer money and stuff. But there is the I think I brought this up in the Spare special, if I can find it, if you'll permit me just 1 minute. In terms of voodoo, this idea is implicit in the Petro rites and their emphasis upon the spaces between the cardinal points of the compass, of the offbeat rhythms of the drums of the loa from beyond the veil, and formulate the laws of their manifestation. Spare's system of sorcery, as expressed in the Zos Kia Cultus, continues in a straight line not only the Petro traditions of voodoo, but also the Vama Marg of Tantra, with its 8 directions of space, typified by the yantra of the Black Goddess Kali, the cross of the 4 quarters, plus the in-betweenness concepts that together compose the 8-fold cross, the 8-petaled lotus, a synthetic symbol of the goddess of the 7 stars plus her son, Set or Sirius. Like, for real, this is a strangely chaotic type thing where it's like, you know, the 8-limbed cross, the 8-point star of the coyote, right? That came from Michael Moorcock, supposedly. And then it's like Kenneth Grant is here. Like, hold on. All right, okay. Just for the record, Cult of the Shadow 75, Liber Null, what was it? 87, something like that. I know that it was published on before,
but I believe it was 77 that like the first version was published.
Yeah. It's one of those. I think I said this in the spare special. I think I did. But it's like it's very odd that the granddaddy of chaos magic, who is Spare, has Kenneth Grant putting words in his mouth, bringing up the eightfold cross, the eight-petaled lotus, the in-betweenness, the compass layout, whatever you could call it. And it's like, oh no, that's the chaos star. That's the chaos sphere. Really, always it tickles me. It really does. And that's right at the end of Cults of the Shadow when he's talking about the Zoski occultus, the essentially, which is like this magical current that exists because Kenneth and Steffi Grant started cozying up Spare. It exists because of that. And he's equating this particular symbol in that work, and he's mentioning it's like, oh, it's associated with voodoo, it's associated with this and that, and it does go to Spare's notions of atavistic returns, which is something that Grant talks about consistently throughout his own work, and it's very strange to me. It really is something that makes me go like, love it or hate it. Kenneth Grant is one of the forebearers that gets us to chaos magic. Right down to something as obscure and arbitrary as the symbol. You can say it's Michael Moorcock all you want, but like, it's right there. It is right fucking there. You gonna tell me that they didn't know that? You gonna tell me that nobody in the IoT read that? Bullshit. Yeah, it was Michael Moore. No. It was Michael Moorcock. I don't believe you. I don't fucking believe you.
I think we should wrap up these three then. What do we have to say as a whole for the first 3 books of the series?
It's mostly like one book and then Cults of the Shadow. I really do think, as we've established, that Kenneth Grant has a particular view that he will continue through the next 6 books to sort of use as his structure to explain every instance of a magical tradition, at least all of the magical traditions that he is interested in talking about. And he will make them form around this. And it does, at its core, relate to the idea of the body as the core, as the microcosm, macrocosm correspondence with a particular type of magical practice. In that all of the methods and energies and forces of magic that exist, quote, out there, are embodied within us. And I think that is a fascinating approach. He will use quotes from Crowley, he will cite sources, he will go off on fanciful tangents and try to equate religions that he probably knows very little about. He will use his contemporaries. He will use people like Akkad and Bertio. He will use poorly cited works of anthropology to essentially describe a root for all of these practices. And I think it's fascinating. Do I agree with it? Not really. Not in any grand objective sense. But I do think that he is someone that if you can internalize his work, if you can really read through it and get down with it, it can do a lot for you. It can do a lot of interesting things. It can get your brain working in a lot of ways that you weren't expecting. And I think that's really cool. I think it's a beautiful thing.
I do too. I think Grant is a testament to the sort of radical individualism that you can find in occultism. I think his emphasis on the very disparate things that influenced him and his magical work is second to none, really. It's fantastic the way this man has, beyond the criticisms we can level at it in certain ways, just the cohesiveness and coherence and the dense work that he puts into trying to make it work. It doesn't always come across as amazing, but it's overwhelmingly a very fascinating and interesting interpretation of occultism as it stands. And I think, in no small part that it is due to the sort of, again, I hate to use the term because we've said it so many times now, but the practical application and understanding of the human body that's apparent throughout the whole of it.
And I think in a way, right, it's easy to hand wave stuff away with Grant because in a way it's difficult. If you acknowledge that there is a certain physicality, if there's a certain biological reality to magic, it's hard because it puts the onus on you. You have to properly utilize it. You don't just, you can't just like jerk off when you feel like it or things like that. It's like you have to understand it's like what you're tapping into is a force that can be utilized for good or bad. And if left unattended, it can wreak havoc on you. It can really screw you up. Also, he represents a great challenge to anybody who wants to read him in that you have to be able to parse the jewels from the chaff, You have to be able to take what's good and use it properly and not lose your head in the sea of numerology and gobbledygook and bad anthropology. Like I said, I really do like these works. I think that and I'm somebody that I think that there's something really useful in the slightest sense, lose your head. There is something to be said about going down a rabbit hole of a particular author, and not just in occultism, but like in philosophy and hell, if it was about making baked goods or something, of just really immersing yourself in the work of an author and just letting them have their way with you for just a little bit, just enough that you don't go completely crazy. Grant is someone that you have to reckon with because of his profound influence. And you really do have to give it up to him that without Grant, chaos magic would not exist the way it does. And it's really cool. That's really great to me, at least. And going forward, we'll probably have a lot more criticisms and a lot more to say about the ways in which he kind of, in his own way, lives up to what Crowley thought of him, particularly with how he starts on Akkad a little bit in this one, and he starts really going hard on the idea that Akkad must have known something rather than because I think a lot of Thelemites, I think, are probably of the opinion that it's Akkad was crazy. I mean, there's that story of I don't think it's true, but it's that story of Akkad stripped naked and ran through the streets, went totally nuts.
Oh yeah, it's not true, but
it's something that gets repeated a lot. So there's the idea that Akkad was just kind of went crazy, and he's just another in the long lines of people that Crowley fucked up. But Grant seemed to think he had something that shows up in a lot of the later books. And as we go through them, we might be able to show how Grant started with great intentions and a sort of consistent idea and perhaps lost it a little bit as things go on. But I do think these first three books are particularly notable in the idea of someone attempting to reckon with magic at a time when a revival was going on, but we weren't quite sure where it was going to go. And he seemed very convinced that not only was magic the ultimate answer to how we respond to the late 20th century into the 21st century, but someone who felt ultimately that his ideas were going to be vindicated. In the same way that he mentions Wilhelm Reich in these early books. Wilhelm Reich he was positive that his ideas were going to be vindicated, not just by people who resonated with them, but by science as a whole.
I don't know what else to say about the man at this point. He's something. But as far as these first three books, I think that's good enough for a special, don't you?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think I think we've said about And granted, God bless you if you've held on this long. It has been very conversational and sort of, oh, but what about this? But what about this? Perhaps we've given you a flavor, a tasting of this man's work.
And who knows, if you stick around for 10 more episodes, maybe we'll get to the next 3.
And I will say, it's like he starts getting into the ideas of the cliff off. He talks about like universe B and like the idea of like, oh, well, we all like you have to completely set in order the cliphotic influences on you so that you can rise to the furthest extent of it all. And he goes into some very elaborate descriptions of what these particular maps of occult space look like, and they're very interesting. Like I said, the colors of magic that Carol lays out, you can see those in I believe it's Night Side of Eden. He lays those out, and it's like, oh, that's where he got it from. So the man's influence is undeniable, and it's kind of funny because I do think that, and a lot of times when we bring up Kenneth Grant, he is kind of a joke where it's like, oh yeah, it's all sex magic, but it's like, man, the man's everywhere. He's fucking everywhere.
Well, that's a good enough one to go out on. So with that,
this has been Chaos Magic News, the only podcast that is really just a veiled cipher for the initiation of occult forces in the body during sexual congress.
If you would like to inform us of the missing 2 sexual fluids that science yet knows about, you could maybe tell us over at chaosmagicnews.com, where we'll have articles, links to the podcast episodes, links to our fantastic interview series. We got a couple more we're trying to get out before the end of the year. We'll see how that goes. If you would like a spicy meme, perhaps making fun of Kenneth Grant in the future, you can find us over on social media at Chaos Magic News, pretty much everywhere. We're on Instagram, we're on X, we're at Facebook. We are on Blue Sky at CMN Pod because our curse to return that name to us rightfully has not worked yet.
Come to fruition.
Yeah.
If you have listened to this and thought, for whatever reason, man, I would really like to support these people and possibly get more content like this, we do have a Patreon where for $5 a month, you can support the show and gain access to all of the lovely bonus episodes. We just finished up the Occult Iceberg. We have a reading of the Zoetic Grimoire coming soon. We've also got a couple other special things coming down the pipeline. Also, if you, for whatever reason, think that this was worth opening your wallet, you get your name read right here.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Local. Thank you, Steos93. Thank you, Pope Loki Satyr, the 23rd LLC. Thank you, Supremely. Thank you, Coco. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Acolyte 1 of the Ice Magic Meditation Society. Thank you, Curse T. Thank you, Fyodor Krasny. Thank you, Venus Christ. Thank you, Tentathena. Thank you, Bearded Vegan. Thank you, Tremov. Thank you, Tangy Darling. Thank you, DD Destruction. Thank you, Toziel Obscurus. Thank you, Lavender Ghost. Thank you, Tommy Kelly. Thank you, Double Deered. Thank you, Clodius. Thank you, Cyrenix Flux. Thank you, Eric the Wizard. Thank you, Marcio Mendoza. Thank you, Archaic. Thank you, Sneaky Llama. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Melius. Thank you, Coffin Emoji, Sparkle Emoji. Thank you, Eli Cash. Thank you, Debbie McPherson. Thank you, Rowan of Birch Groves. Thank you, me. Thank you, Inkomskat. And thank you, the Onk you thank. We did it. We thanked you. There's more every time.
Yeah, this list is getting exceptionally long. We're if it gets much bigger, we're gonna have to start thinking of like other things we can do. Maybe like, I don't know, send out a heartfelt note every time an episode comes out.
The song I was using is we're getting longer and longer in the song, and it's very amusing to me. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, but for real, the people that do support this show, and you know who you are, it really does mean the most. It covers the cost of doing this show. It keeps the cost of keeping us on all of the the various streaming platforms. It helps with the paying for subscriptions to edit and stuff like that. It's, I don't know, it's humbling and it's awe-inspiring for the most part. Every episode just turns into us going, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
for helping us get to 60 episodes, y'all. We love you.
Yeah. Yeah, another 40 and then we're going to pull the plug. We're going to
Are we starting
get to
at
100 I don't know. We'll do this show until we're old and gray. So another year.
Well, with all of that said, Old Isis, would you like the last word?
When one creates phantoms for oneself, one puts vampires into the world, and one must nourish these children of voluntary nightmare with one's blood, one's life, one's intelligence, and 1 reason without ever satisfying them. If correctly used, however, there is no limit to what may be achieved by the magical direction of the sexual current.
All right, everyone.
Fuck it up, Kenneth. Fuck it up.
Fuck it up.
Fuck it up, Kenneth. Oh, shit. Fuck it up.
All right, everyone. We will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening.
Bye-bye.
Oh my fucking God, we did it.
Oh man, we did it.
We did it. It's 12 o'clock at night. We did it.
We did it. We did the thing.